guys do. Explore what's all on their minds. And a thing or two, about a thing or two, about a thing or two. Mansplaining is deciding you're gonna search for the truth. Mansplain me, baby. Mansplain. There can be no taking back would be uncool.
Welcome to Mansplaining, a podcast about the interesting things you can discover if you just take the time to learn. My name is Joe. I'm your host for this week, and as always, I'm joined by my college friend Mark. Together, we'll explore what's on our minds and hopefully figure out a thing or two about a thing or two. So, Mark, we're going to talk about gambling in this episode. It's something I've been thinking about for a while, especially with regard to sports gambling and the recent Supreme Court decision that kind of opened the floodgates in that area. And as I mentioned last time, I was originally going to ask you specifically about sports gambling. But since that time, I've been reading a lot of articles about the growth of prediction markets. And it's dawning on me that people can pretty much bet on anything these days. And I wonder if that's good for our society. You know, I think it's probably a scourge and a crisis for our society. That's my operative theory. But I wanted you to do some research on this subject and basically tell me whether you agree. So the specific question I put to you is, what are the implications for our society when gambling becomes ubiquitous? And I'm interested to hear what you have to say about this.
Well, as always, thank you for the question. Before we get into it, I want to start with something that happened just recently. Super Bowl Sunday, pitting my hometown team, the Seattle Seahawks, against the hateful New England Patriots. In the run-up to the game, the American Gaming Association estimated that a record $1.76 billion would be wagered on this one game through legal sports books, which was up nearly 27% from last year. And in fact, several seven-figure bets were placed, including million-dollar bets on both the Patriots and the Seahawks. Can you imagine betting $1 million on the Patriots and losing?
Yes.
But that, of course, is nothing new. Money has been wagered on sports as long as there's been sports. But here's something less expected. On the prediction market platform Kalshi, which we'll have a lot more to say about later, more than $23 million was wagered on whether the actor Mark Wahlberg would attend the game. Not who would win, not the point spread, not the over-under, $23 million wagered on whether a celebrity would be physically present in the stadium. And the whole thing was apparently triggered by an online rumor. Someone claimed that Wahlberg's daughter, a student at Clemson, had told a fraternity brother that her father was going. The rumor went viral, and within days, the yes contract of Wahlberg's attendance was trading at an 89% probability. In the end, though, Wahlberg was a no-show. So, Joe, I hope you weren't one of those betting on yes that Marky Mark would be at the Super Bowl.
No, I was not. And I really don't bet on anything. I think I told you during our lotteries episode that I don't recall ever buying a single lottery ticket in my life. So I'm certainly not a betting man when it comes to prediction markets either. Are you, though? Because I know you told me you bought some lottery tickets in your time. So do you do this other betting as well?
I do not. In fact, college cured me of betting because I remember one night we played poker with betting pennies, and I just lost and lost and lost until all my pennies were gone. And I came out of that thinking, wow, I'm really bad at this. And that stuck with me. So I've never gambled any money of substance. But you asked whether it's a bad thing that Americans seem to be betting on everything now. And yes, you're right. Americans are now betting on everything, from touchdowns to Taylor Swift. And the implications of that shift are, I think, more profound than most people realize. So you didn't ask about sports gambling specifically, and we won't spend much time there. Instead, our topic today is how and why gambling has spread through other aspects of American life and what the consequences of that look like. So let's start with the court opinion that made all of this possible. In 2018, the Supreme Court decided Murphy versus NCAA, striking down the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, which was a federal law that had effectively confined legal sports betting to the state of Nevada since 1992. The court ruled that PASPA violated the 10th Amendment by attempting to dictate how states could regulate wagering, which the court ruled was Congress overstepping its authority. And you mentioned floodgates before, and there were floodgates which opened immediately. States rushed to legalize and tax sports betting, seen as a way to bring in revenue without raising taxes. Exactly the same playbook you'll remember that they used with state lotteries, which we discussed back in episode 106. Mm-hmm. As of today, 39 states and the District of Columbia allow some form of legal online gambling. Since the Murphy decision, Americans have wagered more than $600 billion on sports alone. Between 2019 and 2024, gambling was the second highest service sector industry for GDP growth in the United States, surpassed only by software publishing. Let's reflect on that for a moment. The only industry in the American economy growing faster than gambling is the tech sector.
It's not surprising. That's why I'm asking this question.
No, it isn't. As the industry has grown, the nature of the gambling experience changed. The old model of sports betting involved some degree of friction. You had to go to a casino or find a bookie or at least make a phone call. The new model eliminates all of that. Platforms like FanDuel and DraftKings turned every smartphone into an always open sportsbook that you could access 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, from your couch, your bed, or a high school classroom. The Murphy decision didn't just legalize gambling, it made it frictionless. And as any economist will tell you, when you reduce friction, you increase volume.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the word frictionless, because that is a word that I have heard used in regard to gambling. And I also read something about one of these prediction markets, Kalshi, now has a partnership with a company called Robinhood that does commission-free stock trading. And it seems to me like the frictionlessness of that partnership is very disturbing because it potentially links bettors to their retirement accounts in a frictionless way, where instead of having to go to the trouble of flying to Las Vegas and moving money from your checking account to your betting account, now you could just open your phone and bet your life savings on what color Gatorade is going to be dumped on the winning coach's head. And it just seems too frictionless for my liking.
Yeah. We'll be coming back around to Robinhood later, but you make a good point that it does make it so easy to pull in sources of income that you really should leave off the table when you're gambling. Back in the day, a sports bettor was generally a particular kind of person, overwhelmingly male, generally between the ages of 25 and 55, and a dedicated sports fan who considered himself savvy about point spreads and money lines. But the new improved gambling industry wasn't content to settle for that demographic. They wanted what business strategists call a blue ocean, an untapped market of new customers who had never placed a bet in their lives. And this is where Taylor Swift enters our story. The pop singer Taylor Swift's romantic relationship with Kansas City Chiefs tight end Travis Kelce fundamentally altered the audience base of the NFL, pulling in a significant number of women and families who had no prior interest in football. Overnight, Swifties became Chiefs fans because they care about anything that they imagine Taylor Swift cares about. When the Chiefs won the Super Bowl 2 seasons ago, the internet was flooded with video of Taylor Swift celebrating in the owner's box. Research shows that Swift fans are 16% more likely than the average adult to have lifestyle interests that overlap with sports. That overlap created a direct pipeline for gambling apps to reach demographics that had never been anywhere near a sportsbook.
Now, I knew of that phenomenon, Mark, but I wonder whether that's got legs. I wonder if it's going to still be true 10 years from now when Kelsey's retired and Swift is not attending games anymore.
Mm-hmm. I think that the people within the sports book would think that Taylor Swift introduced the audience to things like professional sports and betting that are in themselves addictive in respect. So she gave them that first taste and then they'd come back for it afterwards.
Right.
And it went beyond just watching football games. Prediction markets and we'll get into those in detail shortly, leaped on this new market opportunity by offering contracts on Taylor Swift's life milestones. You could bet on whether all 12 singles from her new album would chart. You could bet on which engagements would be announced, on how much money each concert would bring in, and on which specific NFL games she'd attend. So with that, let's turn to prediction markets, because this is where the story gets a little strange. The idea behind prediction markets isn't new. It goes back at least to James Surowiecki's 2004 book, The Wisdom of Crowds, which I highly recommend, which argued that large groups of non-experts, when aggregating their opinions independently, can often arrive at more accurate predictions than individual experts. There was always a certain democratic appeal to this idea. There are times when highly credentialed experts are measurably worse at predicting the future within their own field than a crowd of people who know nothing about the topic. Just 2 episodes ago, we went into the controversial status of expertise in America. I didn't think to mention prediction markets in that episode, but it would have been a very interesting part of our discussion. Anyway, back to gambling. The original idea of prediction markets was just to ask a bunch of people to predict the outcome of something, a presidential election, for instance, or whether the stock market would go up or down in the next quarter. But then a crucial change was made. They added real money to the equation. The theory is that when people have skin in the game, their predictions become more reliable because they're putting their own money where their mouth is. They're less likely to just pull a prediction out of thin air because something's at stake. And proponents of prediction markets argue that this makes them a kind of antidote to misinformation, a truth engine that cuts through spin and narrative because money doesn't lie.
You know, I wonder why there's a wisdom in crowds. Is it because the crowd represents the zeitgeist, and the zeitgeist is an accurate reflection of what's going on? I mean, what do you think about that?
I read the book when it first came out, so that was a while ago. But what I remember is that there were examples that were startling. For instance, there was a boat that was lost in a storm. And of course, experts were being consulted because rescue efforts were underway to locate the boat. And the experts were predicting based on wind patterns and the tides on where that boat would be. And then someone else polled a bunch of non-experts, and the non-experts came up with a more accurate prediction.
Wow.
And I remember the book positing that one of the problems with experts is that they subscribe to groupthink within their expertise. Like when you make a prediction as an expert, you're not simply offering your own judgment. You're offering your judgment in your professional context where other experts will judge you for your judgment.
Right.
And so it lends itself to experts walking in lockstep on certain topics
Right.
in a way that can send an entire field in the wrong direction. Whereas people who do not have that background, that context, make predictions that are all over the board. But if you aggregate a large number of those, the average of those things tends to be pretty accurate.
Yes.
It's a very interesting phenomenon, which is why I recommend the book.
It is interesting. And it makes me also think that the groupthink that afflicts experts makes them probably less willing to say something contrarian, even if that's what they really believe.
Exactly.
And that reminds me of the prediction markets for the 2024 presidential election, where, the polling was nip and tuck, and some people thought Harris had a very slight lead, but the prediction markets were solidly in favor of Trump. And I think that's yet another example of the wisdom of crowds.
Yeah, though you do need to take current prediction markets with a grain of salt, because one of the core premises of a prediction market is that you want each person to be polled individually. You do not want them to know how other people are voting on it, because then you're influenced by them. You either want to go with the crowd or you want to be the contrarian. Just the knowledge of what other people are voting influences how you vote.
Yes.
And current prediction markets throw that out the window because you can see where things are trending. So they're not pure prediction markets, and it doesn't quite have the same effect. What would be interesting is if someone were to do an opinion poll, not on how are you going to vote in the election, but who do you think is going to win? Because in that case, you don't know how other people are responding, and that would be a true prediction market.
Right. Yeah. It also occurs to me as we're sitting talking about this subject that you have to wonder whether the prediction market audience is a true reflection of the general public? Is it demographically accurate? Right? Because you always hear about how Twitter is not a good replication of the American public. So maybe all those people picking Trump in the prediction markets is not just a reflection that Trump was going to win, but also a reflection that it skews slightly to the right.
Right. The two biggest platforms today are Kalshi and Polymarket. Kalshi is a U.S.-based exchange federally regulated by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, or CFTC, that operates like a Wall Street trading desk for real-world events. The name is Arabic for everything, which tells you something about the very broad range of things you can bet on. Users buy and sell binary contracts that settle at either $1 if the event happens or $0 if it doesn't. The current price of a contract serves as a proxy for the probability of the event occurring. If a contract for U.S. recession in 2026 is trading at 54 cents, the market is saying there's a 54% chance of that happening. Polymarket takes a different approach. It's a decentralized, blockchain-based platform where trades are settled in cryptocurrency. It historically operated outside the U.S. regulatory framework, though it's been working to re-enter the American market. And both platforms have exploded in scale. Monthly trading volume surged from less than $100 million in early 2024 to over $13 billion by the end of 2025, a 130-fold increase. And Kalshi has partnered with Robinhood, as you mentioned earlier, the popular retail trading app, meaning that prediction contracts are now available to millions of ordinary users alongside their stock portfolios.
God, that's scary.
Yeah. And it creates a problem. These markets are presented as sophisticated instruments of collective intelligence, but for the average participant, the data tells a different story. An analysis of 72 million trades on Kalshi revealed what researchers called an optimism tax, a systematic transfer of wealth from retail traders to professional market makers. Ordinary users disproportionately buy yes contracts on unlikely outcomes, essentially purchasing hope. At the 1 cent price level, the longest of long shots, the expected return for buying yes was negative 41%. You'd lose nearly half your money. Meanwhile, buying no at that same level yielded a positive 23% return. For context, Las Vegas slot machines return about 93 cents on the dollar. Some of these prediction market bets are significantly worse than pulling a lever at a casino, but they're marketed as investing rather than gambling. And the media has made the problem worse. Newsrooms have increasingly taken to reporting prediction market odds as though they represent objective truth. This market says there's a 73% chance of such and such thing happening, as if the price reflected some deep algorithmic wisdom rather than the aggregate bets of traders overpaying for hope. When journalists report these odds as truth, they become spectators of a manufactured narrative rather than investigators of real-world events. It's another recurring theme, our media today playing into problems instead of reporting on them.
Yes. I'm also thinking Polymarket and Kalshi probably don't care whether their engines are deemed to be the truth. They just care that they're in the news and people are mentioning them, right?
Yeah.
Because even bad news is good news if you're seeking publicity for your platform.
Yeah, considering how much of the money bet on Kalshi goes back to the house, anything that they bring in through good news or bad news is just profit on their end.
Right. And really, this is precisely why I never gamble, right? Because if I'm going to gamble, what am I going to gamble on? I'm going to pick the Yankees to win the World Series, and they're going to lose because that's an emotional bet. That's not a bet based on logic or research.
Yeah.
It's these sharps, they're called, who work in Polymarket and Kalshi and actually do research on what words the person they're studying actually says so they can decide whether to bet on him or her saying a particular word, right?
Right.
They've done their research.
Yeah, exactly.
Most of us don't do the research.
Yeah, there's the old saying, a fool and his money are soon parted. And on these
Yes.
prediction markets, an optimist and his money are soon parted.
Right. Attention mansplaining listeners. If you want to engage with Mark and me, you have some options. One is to go to our Facebook page, Mansplaining the Podcast, where you can leave a comment or question, check our sources, suggest topics for future episodes, or just like us. Because who doesn't want to be liked? You can also reach us through whatever app you use to listen to this podcast by giving us a 5-star rating or writing a review of your favorite episode. Or you can call and leave us a message on our dedicated voicemail box, which is 206-486-4074. And did you know that you can now listen to full episodes of Mansplaining on YouTube and check out our podcast music on Spotify? Yep, it's true. Just type Mansplaining Podcast into the search bar on either platform and you'll find us. It's lonely in podcast land, and we welcome and appreciate any feedback you might want to share. Act now and we'll throw in a set of Ginsu knives. Not really.
So if the idea of wagering on Taylor Swift's love life strikes you as frivolous, I'd like to introduce you to the genuinely dystopian edge of prediction markets, the geopolitical casino. Users on these platforms have bet on airstrikes, military operations, the capture of foreign leaders, and the containment of wildfires. And in January of this year, there was a particularly dark example of this. On the evening of January 2nd, an anonymous account on Polymarket that had been created less than 1 week earlier placed over $30,000 in bets that Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro would be removed from office by the end of January. The odds of this happening at that point were between 5 and 8%. A few hours later, in the early morning of January 3rd, U.S. Army Delta Force commandos descended on a military complex in Caracas and captured Maduro. The anonymous trader netted over $400,000. The account had only ever made 13 bets, all of them related to Maduro's removal. The bulk of the money was placed the night before the raid was publicly announced. The account's entire existence pointed towards a single conclusion. Someone who knew the operation was coming had decided to profit from it.
Yes.
So was this insider trading?
Yes.
It would seem obviously so, and experts have stated the same, but prediction markets exist in a regulatory gray area where the rules around insider trading are ambiguous at best. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which is supposed to oversee these platforms, has about 1/8 the staff of the SEC, despite Kalshi alone processing more than $2 billion in trades in a single week. And given that Donald Trump Jr. serves as an advisor to both Polymarket and Kalshi, skeptics have questioned whether any sort of enforcement is likely, especially when he and other White House insiders have an opportunity to pocket lots of money by placing bets on state secrets.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned the Maduro thing, because that's the one famous thing about prediction markets that I knew about going into this. And it seems like barely regulated prediction markets are like a veritable playground for insider trading, right?
Yeah. And the defense against charges of insider trading is to point out that there may not even be such a thing as insider trading on prediction markets, because it's this weird gray area between a gambling casino and a investment house. But aside from legality, there are deeper ethical and psychological questions when military raids, mass violence, and geopolitical instability become tradable assets. When you wager on whether an airstrike will occur, civilian casualties dissolve into what amounts to a binary yes or no contract. Socialists describe this as the, quote, exsanguination of empathy, unquote, the draining away of human feeling in favor of clinical speculation. And it creates a perverse incentive structure. If you've bet that a conflict will escalate, you have a financial interest in violence. Peace settles markets by ending the game, which means the money is on the side of escalation. Critics have even raised concerns about contracts wagering on California wildfires, specifically whether betting on when a fire will be contained could nudge disturbed individuals towards arson to make their contracts pay out. So what does all of this add up to? Let's talk about consequences. The economic damage is measurable and is grim. Bank of America has identified gambling as a source of emerging credit risks across the broader economy. Nearly 40% of American men and 20% of American women now gamble online every day. Approximately 2% of online bettors spend more than 10 hours a day gambling on their devices. In states where high-speed online betting is available, studies have documented declining credit scores, surging bankruptcy rates, and increased auto loan delinquencies. Among young people, the picture is especially bleak. Sociologists have identified what they call long degeneracy, a turn towards speculation among young people who believe that traditional paths to wealth, like working up the corporate ladder and buying a home, are now closed to them. If you can't save your way to financial security, maybe you can bet your way there. School officials report that sports betting has become as ubiquitous as cell phones, and they judge it to be as poisonous as social media among young boys. Kalshi, if you're wondering, allows people as young as 18 to purchase contracts on the platform.
Yeah, this is, you put your finger on another really important thing here. So it seems to me, I read an article about prediction markets in the New York Times. I was thinking as I was reading that article of how prediction market bettor seems a close cousin to the video gamer, right? Largely male, largely alone, nerdy guys working alone in their parents' basement, indoors, 23 hours and 59 minutes out of every day, intensely focused on one thing to the exclusion of everything else.
Yeah.
It seems to me like it's a really desolate life of loneliness.
Yeah.
Just seems a desolate place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that comes a public health crisis. Approximately 2.5 million Americans meet the criteria for a severe gambling problem, with another 5 to 8 million experiencing mild to moderate issues. Online gambling has the highest odds of producing problem behavior, affecting as many as 16% of users. Problem gamblers, meanwhile, exhibit the highest rate of attempted suicide among all addiction disorders. 1 in 5 has attempted to take their own life. Previously, all the way back in episode 14, we discussed the legalization of drugs. And you could argue that gambling is, in fact, this nation's first legalized drug. It is demonstrably addictive. Its most vulnerable users are disproportionately the young and the financially precarious. Its pervasive spread follows the same pattern that drug policy analysts warn about when it comes to legalizing substances like heroin or cocaine. And its many negative effects, such as economic disintegration, family breakdown, public health costs, and suicide, offer a kind of preview of what the full legalization of dangerous drugs might do. We don't need to legalize opioids to see what happens when an addictive substance is made widely available and marketed aggressively, because we already have a natural experiment running, and it's called the American gambling industry.
Yeah.
So is anyone doing anything about this? Sort of. The regulatory landscape is best described as a tug-of-war. The CFTC, under its current chairman, has been actively promoting prediction markets ever since he was sworn in back in December. He has instructed CFTC staff to step back from regulating political and sports-related contracts. And in February, he gave a Bloomberg interview where he framed prediction markets as financial instruments rather than gambling operations. And then just earlier this week, he published a Wall Street Journal op-ed in which he described prediction markets as instruments that, quote, help market participants hedge risk, aggregate information, and test hypotheses about future outcomes, unquote. He's also instructed the CFTC to file a friend of the court brief supporting the platform Crypto.com in its appeal against Nevada regulators. Crypto.com advertises itself as, quote, one place for all markets where you can stay on top of crypto, stocks, and prediction markets, unquote. These actions have provoked pushback from both Democrats and Republicans in Congress. Meanwhile, 34 state attorneys general have pushed back, arguing that platforms like Kalshi are indistinguishable from unlicensed gambling operations. Las Vegas poker rooms, as they put it, arguing that federally regulated prediction markets circumvent state gaming laws. Massachusetts has already obtained an injunction blocking sports-related wagering on Kalshi, and there's a lot at stake here. Massachusetts gets 20% of the revenue from their state licensed sports betting market, so they have strong interest in restricting gambling to the platforms that generate revenue for the state. On the legislative front, there are two proposals worth knowing about. The Safe Bet Act would ban the use of AI to track bettors' habits and target losing users with promotions, a practice the industry calls carpet bombing. It would also prohibit sportsbook ads during live events and mandate that the U.S. Surgeon General study the public health consequences of gambling. The Public Integrity and Financial Prediction Markets Act, introduced by Representative Richie Torres after the Maduro incident, would criminalize insider trading on prediction markets by federal officials, political appointees, and executive agency employees. Both of these bills are pretty limited in scope, and whether either of them has a serious chance of passing in the current political environment is another question. The prediction market industry is well-funded, well-connected, and, as we noted, has direct ties to the White House. The CFTC has dropped several investigations into these platforms, and Truth Social has announced plans to launch its own prediction market. We are not at present on a trajectory toward effective regulation, and it would seem we are quite the opposite.
Yeah, those two legislative solutions you mentioned, they do nothing more than take the edge off the pain and heartbreak and torment that is facing all these losing bettors and society at large. You know, they're good measures, but they don't come anywhere close to solving the problem.
No, even if both passed and were fully put into effect, it would have a minimal impact, it would seem.
Yeah, and they won't pass. They have no hope of passing until the current president is out of office.
Mm-hmm. So you asked whether you were wrong to see the ubiquity of gambling as a terrible state of affairs, and I don't think you are. What we're witnessing is something you could call the financialization of reality, the transformation of every event, every outcome, and every human experience into an opportunity to place a wager. A pop star's love life becomes a derivatives market. A celebrity's attendance at a football game becomes a prop bet worth millions of dollars. A military raid becomes a bet on who wins and loses, who lives and who dies. And underlying all of it is an industry designed with considerable sophistication to extract money from people who can least afford to lose it while giving them the impression that they can profit on their own cleverness. In episode 106, we talked about lotteries as a tax on hope. Prediction markets are a tax on optimism, on the belief that you can see the future. And as we already know, there are only three sure things: death, taxes, and the fact that the house always wins.
Yeah, I quite agree. I think you really put a good bow on it there, Mark. And I love that term, the financialization of reality. I think that's really profound. I was thinking to myself when you were talking about all the political things that are getting bet on, how long will it be before Kalshi or Polymarket sanctions betting on a political assassination, right?
Right.
Talk about the hyper financialization of reality. There you go.
Right. Yeah, as I was doing this, I was remembering a very old Clint Eastwood movie from the 70s called The Deadpool. Do you remember that?
Yes.
The plot of that movie is that there was a group of, I believe, celebrities or whatever, I don't remember exactly, who were betting on who on a list of people would be the next to die. And those people on the list were dying, and Clint Eastwood was investigating. And it turns out that someone was killing those people in order to win his bet on who was going to die next. Right. And basically, life has come around to imitating a Clint Eastwood movie in that you can now place bets on military operations. And as you say, there's a very fine line separating this state from a future state in which you can bet on the likelihood of an assassination or a school shooting or some horrible thing that someone might be incentivized to make happen in order to win a bet that he's placed on the markets. Yeah.
There's a couple other things I wanted to talk about. One has to do with sports. I know we only touched on it at the very beginning, but it is relevant to the sober state of affairs here with gambling's ubiquity. I feel like all these recent arrests we've been reading about in the newspapers, arrests of professional athletes, in high profile sports like baseball or basketball who are arrested for colluding with gamblers on their own performance in their own team's games. I think that imperils sports because it undermines one of sports' highest virtues, which is fairness,
Yeah.
the level playing field. That term itself comes from sports. It's something that we all kind of revere, and it's greatly undermined by allowing athletes themselves to wager on their own performance. And I just feel like the spread of prediction markets could potentially affect all the rest of us,
Right.
You talk about betting on our own optimism. Betting on our own performance in everyday life is another thing that could easily happen.
Yeah. I can't imagine a future in which someone would bet on my performance at work, but maybe that's selling myself short.
Right. I mean, all kinds of examples pop into my head. I'm the head of a union. I know my union is going to strike the big company we work for next week, right? I will bet on the profitability of that company going down the tubes in the near term because I know I'm going on strike. That stuff could easily happen. And then the fairness in everyday life is just as imperiled as the fairness in sports.
Yeah. And I remember at the company where I used to work, sitting through insider trading sessions where they said specifically you're not allowed to do those things. But insider trading doesn't really exist on prediction markets. So you could place a bet on Kalshi or Polymarket and be theoretically at least in the clear on your company's insider trading policy because you didn't buy stocks on Wall Street. So it creates all these negative incentives for people to act contrary to the way that they're supposed to because suddenly they have a financial incentive to do so.
Yes, exactly. There's one other thing I want to say, and it's to your point about gambling being the first legalized drug. It also occurred to me that there's kind of a slippery slope aspect of this, of removing restrictions for gambling. It's going to inevitably mean that more people do it, right? And I would be willing to bet on that. That would be a good bet to make because I think there's a parallel to the decriminalization of some drugs. I know I've complained to you offline about how, ever since pot was decriminalized, I can't walk anywhere in New York City without smelling marijuana multiple times. It's like everybody's smoking pot on the street now.
Yeah.
And it's just beggars belief to think that all those people were smoking pot on a weekday morning before it was decriminalized. It's just simply a no-brainer that there are more people doing it. So regardless of how you view the merits of legalized gambling, because there are some points to be made to the positive, there's no doubt that it's just going to make many, many millions more people engage in the behavior.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I remember while we were discussing legalized drugs, what I feel is the under-considered aspect of that among those people who advocate for drug legalization is just how powerful advertising is, marketing, particularly today with the many, many networks where you can be served highly personalized ads. Marketing driving dishwashing liquid is annoying. Marketing driving an addictive substance is devastating because it's a very powerful instrument driving you towards something which once you engage with it, you might not be able to disengage.
Right.
And you can talk about you need to legalize drugs because of the impact on communities of criminalization and yada, yada. But when you take something that's addictive and you put a high-priced marketing campaign against it, there is no way that that is not going to become a pervasive factor within society, consumed by far more people than before, with a whole bunch of knock-on effects that you didn't anticipate and never wanted.
Right. And we're going to have to wait for all the social scientists to chronicle what happens to our society when everybody bets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. that we'll have to wait for those studies to be published. All right. Well, thank you. I had a feeling my hunch about this was correct, and you've pretty much verified it. So I appreciate that. And I thought it was an interesting conversation.
Yeah, me too. I had a good time.
Okay. Now, this is normally the point where you would ask me a question for next time, but we're going to do something different this time. Over the course of this podcast, which started 5.5 years ago, we've collected a lot of feedback from you, the listeners, and we've been negligent, frankly, in not responding to that feedback sooner. It is true that we've posted some replies to some of the comments we got on our Facebook page, but generally speaking, we have not dipped into our mailbag in a way that's appropriate given the number of things we've heard from listeners over the years. So Mark and I are going to dip into that very mailbag for our next episode, and we're going to curate some of the more interesting comments we've received on various episodes of this podcast since its inception. And I'm looking forward to that. How about you, Mark?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think in some cases we'll just respond off the top of our head, conversation style.
Right.
And in other cases, we're going to be sent off on like a new mini research dive to find new information and bring it back to the topic to sort of extend the episode from before. So it'll be an interesting way to pull old conversations forward and make them new again.
Yes, so stay tuned, folks, for the first mansplaining mailbag, we'll call it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's coming up for our next episode in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, we're going to need a theme song for that, aren't we?
Well, the trusty mansplaining house band, I'm sure, is up to the task. But until then, that was Mark, and I'm Joe, and we'll talk to you next time.
Talk to you then.
I'll bet you never heard about the men they call sharps. We're out here hunting easy marks. I'll bet you're wondering why Elon's replacement lives in his parents' basement. I'm a prediction market trader, 21st century corporate raider, a pencil neck Darth Vader. My wealth I'm gonna flaunt. I can stop anytime I want, but I don't wanna stop. I'll bet you're impressed. I have a necklace made of pearl, and sure I've never kissed a girl. I'll bet you didn't know that I'm a lion, hear me roar, though I never go outdoors. I'm a prediction market trader, living like a corporate raider, an asthmatic Darth Vader. I'm on my way to the top. I should get out before I flop, but I don't wanna stop. My mom says betting's a losing game, but the boys on Reddit say she's lame. We've all got diamond hands today. The crowd is wise, or so they say. Can't lose, about that we all agree. And if you doubt it, someday you'll see. I'm a prediction market trader, calcium my digital enabler, a celibate Darth Vader, gonna be on top of the top. The odds may eventually drop, but I don't wanna stop. Prediction trading is hard work, so I don't care if you think I'm a jerk. The house always wins, or so they say. Not in my house, not today. I'm betting the world ends in 2183. That's a bet I'll collect on personally. Place your bets, place your bets. The future's just a wager. Place your bets, place your bets. It's all certain, nothing's safer. Place your bets, place your bets. Been buying contracts for days here. Place your bets. Place your bets.
Mansplaining is brought to you by Joe and Mark and nobody else. Music composed and performed by the Mansplaining House Band. Thank you for spending your time with us, and we'll see you next time.